Our next guest on the Any Given Monday podcast is an author of a new book, The Story of Donore Harriers. The book highlights over 130 years of tradition through their sports and social history, along with producing international athletes, Olympians, national records, and even world records. Pat Cassidy, welcome to this week's episode of the Any Given Monday podcast. How are you getting on?
Very well. Good morning, everybody.
Pat, to cover a book of such a fantastic history of a fantastic club means you've probably been around it a little while and been around running. Where did running start for you, and how did you get involved in running to start?
Yeah, it's a long story. I would think that probably the first sort of inspiration would have been hearing about somebody like Ronnie Delaney winning a gold medal in Melbourne when I was a tiny little fellow down in West Cavan. That seemed to just click. We were quite a big Gaelic football county back then, but this was a little gem coming right through, coming over the radio. And I think I just had this interest then through the 60s in secondary school. And it was quite good. I knew right away I could run, but I didn't really do a lot of running in secondary school, even though I was in a school in Ballinamore in Leitrim where there was quite an athletics tradition beginning to be developed under Pádraig Griffin, who was a later Olympic coach. But I really think when I went to UCD in 69, 70, the bug really hit. And I suddenly found myself in a really, I won't say proper, but a real athletic club, very high standards, and a lot of prestige in actually wearing the singlet, and a lot of really big competitions like universities, the colours between UCD and Trinity. And these were really very, very sort of big competitions, national competitions. So, and that was it. I kind of just, it was I just developed it naturally. But it was really in my late teens, early 20s before I began to really train seriously and to put down the kind of do the legwork that you just have to do, you know. And then I choose to have a career in Dublin teaching. And I was wondering what club in Dublin I would join. And a great friend of mine, Matt Rudden, who was a great character, said that Donore was the club. And he said it was the club because of one particular person, a man called Eddie Hogan. And he said that Eddie Hogan is the man who knows as much about running as anybody can know. So I found myself down in Hospital Lane in late 1974, joining Donore Harriers. And I've just been a very contented and happy member ever since.
Pat, when we talk to people who are talking about run clubs and getting involved now, and when you look at Athletics Ireland, we're pushing people towards running. Running has become really popular, and it's always been popular in certain circles, but in terms of the general public and the general athlete and using running as a general fitness has become massively popular over the last 10 years. Back then, you obviously came from UCD and you had a good running background, so maybe you didn't have the same fear. But what was it like to be a part of a club and joining a club, particularly Donore Harriers, back then, and to move on to what we see? What difference, the stark contrast, do you see now as new members are joining Donore?
It was very much an organised club structure back then, whereas today it isn't. I mean, that's one of the great good things about today is that really people are running. They don't have to be in clubs. But back then, athletics was about getting into a club. It was about competing in championships like the Dublin Championships, the Leinster Championships, the National Championships. And if you could go further. So it was quite structured like that. I wouldn't say it was elite, but it was hard, it was tough, hard going, you know, and like Donore would have had at that stage about 50 to 60 members, but the standard was very, very high. And I mean, the first evening, I remember down in this little narrow lane in Hospital Lane at Island Bridge, warming up on my first real Tuesday night session. And warming up alongside me were Tom O'Riordan, Tony Murphy, Jim McNamara, John Phelan, Eddie Spillane, Mick Flood, and Eamon Coughlin. Now, you could have picked the Irish senior cross-country team there and then in October from that group and sent it out in February, and it wouldn't have done too badly. So clubs like that, but there were small numbers, and most people were dealing with it very seriously. They weren't in it to run marathons. So we were in it for club championships cross country. And then during the summer, it was track. And there was a lot of road racing. Now, the road racing that was highly competitive because all the clubs took it very, very seriously. So a race like Donore Harriers ran a Quinlan Cup at the end of January, and there might have been 200 people in that. But it was seriously, seriously competitive. And the top 10 in that race could be the top 10 in the All-Ireland Senior Cross Country a month later. So I suppose there wasn't that huge mass participation that really came in, I'd say, in the early 80s with the Dublin Marathon. Before that, the clubs were smaller, they were more specialised, they were kind of very much geared to putting teams into competitive championships, like, as I said, the Dublins, the Leinster, the Eastern Region, as they call it, and then the nationals, and even then the internationals. So, and it was a highly structured season, and it gradually merged into what we have today during the 80s. And I think that, certainly the Dublin City Marathon played a huge role in that, which, in a sense, it's a revolution, really.
From when the Dublin City Marathon came in, Pat, how was it straight away the national championships and this big deal, or did it take years and years for that to evolve and more members coming into Donore Harriers?
Well, the Dublin Marathon did hit the road literally very quickly, and I was listening to Dick Hooper being interviewed at the Athletics Awards last Wednesday. And Dick would have been one of the people that would have put this race on the map. So we went very quickly from having really highly specialised road races in places like Wexford and Drogheda into a race in Dublin where you might have 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people running. So you would have elite athletes like Jerry Kiernan, perhaps, or Dick or John running in this. And then, but you had this mass participation thing. And I think clubs like Donore were almost caught off hand by this. And most of these people didn't necessarily want to join a club anyway because they were able to pick up their schedules from books like The Irish Runner. Frank Greedy tapped into it very, very quickly. So you almost had a duopoly of running. You had the clubs continued on in their own way, as they had been doing for almost a century. But then you had this new boom, this mass participation, very, very much road racing and very much half marathons and marathons.
How was it, the transition, and at what point did clubs, and I come at this from probably, I understand when you go in there, you probably felt I'm not good enough to compete with the list of people you've just said who could wear an Irish bib, and you're training with them and improving with them. You're being coached by specialists, like you said, structured season. We know what we're about. We know what we're doing. What was the turning point in the history where clubs started to say, listen, there's a boat leaving, and if we're not on it, other clubs are going to take on the mass participation. They're going to get more involvement. Like we look at a club or a GAA as part of the community. Instead of being top athletes, at what point did Donore transition into this community club where actually, we can take on people for a half marathon and give them guidance? And was that a very clear or a marked transition in the history?
It wasn't clear. It was a gradual process. One of the issues we had, though, is that we were operating in a very, very small physical clubhouse in Island Bridge, Hospital Lane, which really was just a one-roomed cottage almost. So even having a women's section in our club was quite difficult until the 1980s. We simply just didn't have the facilities. I think what made us turn is that we realised that our facilities would have to change. And then in the 80s, we began to look for an alternative to our base in Hospital Lane. And we had two wonderful people working on this, a wonderful man called Pat Mullally and Maurice Ahern. And Maurice, of course, is the co-author of this book. And they just had really great contacts. And eventually they beavered away during the 80s, and we came up with a site in Chapel Lizard where we are now structured. And this changed the game for us. We were able to build a really modern structure there that could hold 20, 50, 100 people. We were later able to get a track down the side of it. We had a facility there. We had car parking. So I think moving to Chapelizza, to our new headquarters, around about 1990, was a game changer. And then we were able to then go out there into the communities and bring in the Fit for Life people. I remember when the women's mini marathon started off, there were these little leagues started off to prepare people for that. And we were very quickly into that. And I think, so roughly, when we got our structure and our new clubhouse and we're able to develop that and get that type of facilities and have the park on our doorstep, that changed us. And then we were able to adjust to this. So we were able then to continue on as what we call, I detest the word elite, but as a top class athletic club. But we were then able to structure ourselves and have all the other layers of running, because most people don't want to compete in cross country. They don't want to compete in championship races. Most of them just want to run to enjoy themselves and for the health benefits that are there. So I think we were, certainly by 1995, we were well structured in this. We've continued on like that. So we would have about at least 5 or 6 different layers of athletics at the moment. I mean, we still have our very, very top quality people like Jack Rafter, 400 meters Olympian, right down. But equally, we then have Fit for Life people. We have our early beginning clubs. So we have lots of layers, and I think we were able to basically become a community club. And I think that was always the dream of Morris O'Hearn. Morris always felt that we would have to, the future of athletics was getting into communities. Because before that, we were pulling our members from all over the place, and what we were getting was, if a really good young athlete from the country was coming to Dublin in the 70s and 80s, many of them joined clubs.
Catch them at the county border. Come here.
Exactly. Exactly. So clubs like DCH and Clonliffe and Crusaders and ourselves, and we benefited from that. But that was good for us, but it was also good for athletes because they didn't have the structures like today. They weren't going home every weekend, and they were coming into clubs like ours, which had a highly qualified coaching set up. They were going to Clonliffe so it was beneficial all around. That's changed now, of course. Many of these young athletes coming up from rural areas, they're coming to the colleges, they're getting high qualified, they're already in really good structural things through AI, junior, underage. So they don't necessarily need to get into their national coaches there at all events. So they don't have to come to a club like ours to get specialised coaching. It's there structurally at the national level.
As you said, kind of the teams would almost pick themselves. The natural talent would shine and they would be picked up by clubs. They would naturally move into that. Like you said, they'll maybe watch some Irish athletes in the Olympics. They know they can run themselves. They get involved. They join a club like yours because the prestige and like many clubs around the country, the prestige of it, the road racing. When you transitioned into a community event from around 95, did you start to see that actually there are people who still don't know they're good runners that came down just to join the club, just to stay fit, and now that community aspect has transpired into we're actually finding a couple of people that probably never would have come on a running path if their dad didn't bring them down for the occasional run, or are we still kind of the raw talent will still shine and gets coached through the younger ages through Athletics Ireland? Or did you guys then find, because as people started to learn what is running, and how do I train about running through the community aspect, did you start to find that you were producing more of a strong core athlete group who probably never would have been part of this?
It's difficult to be exact about that, but certainly our women's section took off because of this mass participation coming in and then having a really tremendous structure with great athlete Jim McNamara who went into coaching. And I think, so I would say a lot of very, very ordinary women who came down just to basically maybe train for Fit for Life suddenly found themselves caught up in a structure where they could actually achieve, if they followed that. So And the community thing is very big because, I mean, somebody like Jack came down to us, Jack Rafter, and Jack was cross-country running, you know, just which most young athletes do when they're 9, 10, 11, 12. And he hung around, and suddenly one of our coaches began to realize that this guy has got promises in much shorter events, you know. So you do. The benefits are really there. They have to be, because, I mean, this is the way you reach out. You must get the people in. And I think athletes then, I think most people know within a short while, I think you know whether you can compete at the level that you're at, and whether you want to do it as well, which is the really big issue. You know, do you really want to train? Are you happy enough training 3 or 4 days a week? Or do you want to come down here and start running maybe 7 days a week and having perhaps interval sessions, you know, which some of us love. I mean, I just loved interval running, but it's not for everybody, you know, and it's shorter, but it's much sharper and harder, but it's a huge part of the schedule that anybody would have, is to do sort of interval hardcore running. So there's no clear answer, I would say, on that. But I think when you're a community club like us, you get the best of both worlds. A lot of people will come in and they're quite happy being, you know, at their level. But then you will see people like Jack that are special and that develop and quickly move up through the ranks.
You mentioned already that the building of the new facilities, and it's one thing we look at when Athletics Ireland are looking to make investment, when governments are looking to make investments, location, and if you build it, people will come. How important in the transition, because we touched on it lightly and you've mentioned it, but when you look back now with hindsight of changing the facility, was a huge step, as you've already mentioned. But when you look at even some clubs who still possibly haven't even got those kind of facilities, their tracks, the Phoenix Parks on their doorstep, how important are the facilities for the development of running in Ireland, not just in your own club? And then, because it's probably mentioned in the book as well, can you attribute that change of facilities to probably exponential growth over another decade after?
Facilities are absolutely crucial. They're crucial with sprinters, they're crucial with hurdlers, they're crucial with long jumpers, they're crucial with high jumpers. So all those technical areas, you can't go high jumping in an Irish winter outdoors. And I mean, there's no doubt about it. The standard, I mean, our Irish athletics has changed utterly. Our strength traditionally back in the 80s was middle and long distance. Now our strengths are sprints and 400 meters. And I mean, being in Paris last year and seeing a women's 4x400 meters Irish team in almost winning medals, I mean, astonished me. I'm shocked by it. Because I was talking to Eamon Coughlin yesterday, and we both just sort of looked at each other and we sort of said, this was something that we would never have seen happening. And you have to have the facilities. I mean, hurdling must be done in very specialized, places. And I think before that, you would get the odd, very, very exceptional athlete who came and just saw and came to top. Somebody like Eamon O'Keefe in the 50s in Donore Harriers. She was just a tremendous thing. You could see right away the physique, the power of this guy. And he specialized in that. But I think facilities are absolutely crucial. The park is a wonderful place for us to run. You put a lot of the groundwork in there. You do a lot of your heavy running there, your easy, slow sort of stuff. It's perfect for that. But when it comes along to doing highly specialized, maybe interval training, when it comes along to basically long jumping, you must have a long jump pit. You must have a throwing circle. You just have to have these facilities. And I do fully agree with you. Build it and they will come. I think that is... And I think I think Irish athletics is pushing that. I think our government is realizing that now. And the World Championships there in Tokyo in September were extraordinary. People like me were almost speechless, you know.
Our athletes have done phenomenal in the last couple of years, and like you said, competing at the highest levels. And then the everyday person is like 47,000 people applied for the Dublin Marathon there the other week to get in there as well. What do you attribute all this to? This big boom? What do you think came? Well, to me and Eric anyway, for the last couple of years being involved, it seems like there's a big boom in running. Is there anything particular you can kind of you've seen through the Donore Harriers, like this was a turning point or something, and it just seems to be growing, or has it just been steadily climbing all these years?
Well, it's been steadily climbing, but I'm still haven't worked out why people want to run the marathon so desperately. and perhaps treat it as the first race that we'll ever run. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, you ran marathons when you got into your 30s and you had a good, long, successful career in cross country and track behind you. And that marathon was something that you tried. And, you know, it was, and you were considered then to be strong and have the mileage done. So the idea that somebody would start off now to prepare for the marathon next September, October would go complete against the grain. But there is a lovely romance about the marathon, of course, and it was always there. But I just haven't put my finger on it. It's just, it's there, you know, I hate the phrase, it is what it is, but the marathon is there. And I mean, for the 47,000 people that applied and got in, there's another 147 who are bitterly and desperately disappointed that they couldn't get in. So I just haven't fully got round to it. I only ran one marathon in my life, and I was in my 40s, and I needed it as a fundraiser. So it never attracted me at all.
Yeah.
I love I love the track. I love the 15, the 5. I like cross country. 12,000 was a little bit long for me. I would love to be competing today where the cross country is 7,500 meters. That's a climb down from 12,000 meters. So I think, but I mean, it's just, hey, anything that promotes this brilliant sport. It's great. And our streets are full of people. Even this morning, as I was coming over here, about 20 or 30 people literally jogging along North Circular Road there at their own pace, stopping for traffic, that sort of thing. And I believe then they do that 3 or 4 miles run, and they have a coffee and hop back. So I mean, it's a social revolution.
I think the social side, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's meeting people, because meeting people, as we've got more social media and we've got more interaction through technology, we've actually become probably the least social we've been in the longest of times. And for me, the running is a fantastic one, because you're less likely to be on your phone. You're with people, you have the coffee, you talk about it, and you get on. And as you correctly said, it's at a pace where people are dictating their own kind of level of hurt and intensity. But as we look at technology, as we've just touched on, and when you go back and you're talking about these great coaches who were revolutionizing Irish athletics at the time, they were the encyclopedias, they were the Googles of running, I suppose, if you want to call it that, and training plans. As you look at the modern day athlete with the sports science that's gone into it, the strength and conditioning, and more importantly, the gadgets and the gizmos, has running changed that much, Pat, since you picked it up in the early days? Or are we seeing a slight difference in terms of the coaches that we're doing, the methods that we're doing, or are the basics still the basics? And how have you looked at that over the last, since the 60s, I suppose?
I haven't analysed the new shoes. But hey, listen, when starting blocks were first used, I presume the people who were using a trowel to dig a hole in a cinder track probably felt this wasn't, a fair contest, when tartan tracks replaced cinder tracks, this is progress, and this is brilliant. And I still say to you that somebody like Andrew Coscoran cannot come out and do what he's doing without doing exactly what we did back in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s. You have to run huge mileage. So you've got to run maybe 120 miles a week to develop the power and the stamina. So shoes will only get you so far. Now, coaching and nutrition are really, really important. But these are all gradual little processes. And they're also, for instance, the 4-minute mile is something that any good middle distance athlete now aspires to and hopes to achieve. And that's just a mental thing as well. And once you cross these barriers, training becomes changing. But essentially, training is training. You just got to develop the legs. You got to develop the heart. You got to develop the head and the experience. And it's about literally hard work. There's no, and I think that's one of the things that when you meet people who have run, there's a real bond there because there's no shortcut. And it's great to have these facilities. It's great to have these wonderful shoes, but you still have to do the mileage. So, and it's the world, it's modernism, and it'll keep on turning and it'll keep on changing, you know.
Pat, I can only assume it was during a long run or something you thought to yourself, I must write down 130 years of the Donore Harriers into one book. I must have been your mind spinning on a run like that. I get mad ideas like that and then I forget about them when I'm finished. How did you go, you know what, myself and Maurice Ahern are going to take this responsibility to condense 130 plus years into one book? How did that come about?
Well, I'm a historian anyway, so I teach history. So that's and I'm just utterly never stopped reading it. So, but I remember the first evening I was telling you about that incident down in Donore with all those wonderful athletes. But about a month later, we were having there was a club race in the Phoenix Park, and at that stage, November would have been on a block of very heavy mileage because the cross country season was more of a January, February time scale. And I went up to run in this club race, 4 miles, and 4 miles cross country on Saturday afternoon was a lovely, lovely way. You know, it was almost a relief from heavy mileage. And we went up and it was a handicap race. Confined to club members, 4 miles. So we had a good blowout, as we would call it. Went back down to the club, looked forward to a beer or two. And I looked at the lads doing the handicaps to work out who had won. And I looked over and I saw this magnificent trophy called the Inman Cahill Cup. And it was 1904. And it was like a great big tea churn. And it was superb, silver plated. And I looked at it and I said, this club is more than just about what's here now. This club has deep roots. And I was just, I looked then and I discovered that we had about 6 trophies in the club and all of them were around that period. And I'm just fascinated by athletics anyway and by history and by times. And it was just a natural thing, I think, for me to do. And I began to just, we also had in Donore, we had a tremendous archive of material. So back then, when you joined Donore, you got a wonderful fixture card, which was almost a little mini history of the club. All the Olympians, times of training, so on. And we had a huge collection of them. We had a tremendous archive of photographs. So there's a lot of work there sitting, waiting to be brought to the public's notice. And some of the quality of the photographs were very, very high because back then in the 30s and 40s, when there was an opening run, people didn't have their cameras, or if they did, they were very, very good at it because they had to understand it. So normally we would get a press photographer on a Saturday to take a photograph of the opening run, and it would be therefore a high quality professional photograph. So we had a lot of this sort of stuff. And even if we didn't write at all, I felt that it would be important to put this unique social history out because it really, I mean, we would like to think this is as much a social history as an athletics history. And both Maurice and I have been very much aware of that there, the athletics is important. We have had Olympians, we've had world record holders, we've had international cross country people, but also the bones of the club are the club races. And they're still on a handicap system, which is a magnificent system, a bit like golf. So you can be an ordinary athlete in the Donore Harriers running about 5-minute mile pace, and you can take part, go to the 4-mile cross-country race, the Inman Cahill Cup, run the 4 miles, have your handicap, and there's a very real chance, you've got as good a chance as anybody else on the line of winning it.
How's the handicap decided, Pat?
It's decided on your forum.
On your form, okay.
Yes, and it's usually the handicap. It's quite a big job in a club. Not so much now because this wonderful sort of athletics approach is changing. But I mean, back up until the 1960s, if you went to a track and field meeting in Cork and you were 100 metres run, you had to have your handicap with you. It had to be actually
Okay, yeah.
properly like an ID. And if you didn't, you started off scratch. But if you had a 3 yards handicap officially through the AAU or NACA, you got a 3 yard start. And that was on your form. If you won that race out, then your handicap came back to 2, as in golf.
Okay.
So you get 2 yards. If you were run out of it altogether and didn't compete, you might have 4 yards.
Just by yard, just wrap my head around visualizing
Meters.
this. No, sorry, not by yards and meters. I'm
Sorry
bad that
about
way as well. I mean, like literally, like you would start ahead, or when the time, like you'd all start in the same line.
You start ahead.
Oh, you'd actually start ahead, so you'd have to.
So you'd be starting.
Oh wow, okay.
So there's a scratch line, a 1 meter line, 2 meter line, 3. Now I don't think in 100 meters you get any more than about 7 meters. You can't get it absolute. And I remember running the 1500 meters in UCD Sports in 1972, and that was of a handicap system. And I remember 3 or 4 of us coming across the line, and the Irish Times was there to take a photograph of us. So it was my first time to get on the national newspapers there, leaning over. But the person I was leaning over to beat had about 50 yards on me, you know, so. But then in our races in the park, we would let people off, like we have a 10-mile cross-country race on St. Stephen's morning for a wonderful Waterhouse Burn Bird Shield. So if you have 30, you've got to run 10 miles. So if you've got 30 minutes, you start off, you say at 11. The person on scratch starts at half 11, 11:30. And everybody starts. And all those handicaps have been arranged on your forum throughout the year. Now, it's an inexact science, and a bit like golf. I think you get people who kind of, nurse their handicaps, shall we say.
Yeah.
And the theory, of course, is that everybody should cross the line at the same time. And then there are sealed handicaps. So a sealed handicap is where you made, they may give you 30 seconds, but everybody starts off on the lines, runs the race, all the times are taken, and then the handicaps are taken off when you go back to the club. Right. So it's a slightly different one than just getting out with a start. But we have a famous incident in the book where a man called Frank Cahill, who had joined our club in 1972, and he was still competing in the 1970s, and he had won every race that we had, and 2 of them he had won 3 times, and his name was on those trophies because he'd won them 3 times, but he was seeking to win the 10-mile. And he eventually won it in 1978 off a handicap of about an hour. And the story goes is that some of the people were in bed, just getting up and having a breakfast when Frank set off on his 10-mile trip.
My God.
And Eamon Coughlin in particular, it's a story told about Eamon. And so Eamon thought he had won, having a terrific race, running about 51 minutes for 10 miles on the country on St. Stephen's morning. And Frank was ahead of him. And the Independent next day had this wonderful headline, Cahill 78 outsprints Olympian Coughlin.
But there's an element of magic to that community element, and everyone has a chance, on the big day. Otherwise, it's hard to get out of bed on Stevens' morning to go and compete. But it's like that element when you have the head start, so you're pushing to not be caught. You're giving the leaders of the pack a challenge because they need to catch those who are out in head. So everyone is getting the benefit from the race and is pushing to their maximum. Are they still continued in this tradition today, Pat, or are we still getting out on Stevens this morning? Can I start at 7 and see if I can take on some of the greats of the club?
You could. We had 47 members last year taking it on. I mean, on St. Stephen's morning. And all of them, 46 of them ran the 10 mile. And it's a huge morning for us, particularly. Now, the other club races, it's difficult to actually get the same numbers into them because there's a race every day of the week almost now. Yeah. And, the park runs are brilliant things. And again, lives have changed and, you're not going to maybe give up a Saturday afternoon for a 4-mile cross-country race. So you have to put these things on in the morning. So it's difficult to keep that rhythm going with them. But our 10 mile is now, I mean, it's been going since 1896, 97. So we think it's the longest running cross country race in Ireland, and probably one of the longest out there is. There may be perhaps in parts of England where there's a real Harrier tradition going back even earlier than ours. There may be some clubs over there, but we're there. So we basically run it for since 1897. The only exception being 1916, when there were a bit of a fall off in numbers because of the war. But we've been there every year. We even managed to survive during COVID. The park authorities are really good. And once they knew that people weren't accumulating in large numbers, they sort of looked the other way and we were able to compete. So it's a big race. And the handicap system, people look at it and they sort of say, hey, I've got a chance here. You know, I've got 8 minutes, 50 seconds. I might be able to do this, you know.
It's the most hope me and Eric ever had of winning the race. We're like, oh, we have a chance. We have a chance.
No, I know a handicap system would not be possible in the mass participation today.
Yeah.
But it's a tremendous concept. I mean, you know, and athletics, it was based on that. Apart from championship races, athletics up until the 1960s had a handicap system right across through Britain, Ireland, Europe. And it was, you know, so, I mean, you can, just like golf, you can go down to the Algarve, take your handicap with you, so long as it's a registered handicap, you can compete. So why can't you do that in athletics?
That's a good point.
It just gives that equity, you know, that
it does.
You know, if you are the best, keep being the best. You're constantly being pushed, you know, and it's because so many of our guests come on and they say iron sharpens iron, and training with these great athletes has really pushed me on. But I've no doubt great runners like yourself, when you're seeing someone in the distance and you know you have to make up 8 minutes, you know your paces have to be on, you're still getting the same benefit of that race to prove yourself as the best. Now, of course, for me, if I crossed the line having an hour head start on some of your athletes, I don't think I'd put it on my CV. But because, but in terms of the ability to do your best, and that's all you're asking people to do in the basic form of competing, is just do the best that you can, your ability, and everyone is trying. You know, it's a fantastic concept. And funny enough, I think if more clubs started, or even social clubs started to bring this back, you could use it as almost a highlight of the year.
I think it's very doable within clubs. I don't think it's practical anymore in open competition, but it's very doable in any club to have a handicap system. And it's just, but I mean, when you look at this wonderful historic shield that we have, and you see maybe, or Gregory 1927, nobody knows what handicap he was off. Everybody is in there. Eamon Coughlin is in there. You know, Tom O'Riordan is in there. You know, Bertie Messett, great athletes are there. So are people like Gregory, you know, Joe Dunn, people like that. Joe Rankin are in there. And you look down these names, they're just names. There are no handicaps beside them. They're just names on this great shield. So, you know, it's a romantic concept, I think, but I think I think certainly within clubs, it's worthwhile, you know.
And it's going to be great to learn about that in the book, and all about your Olympians and international athletes and everything else. But before people go and buy the book, just Pat, you've always been there a long time, and there's a lot of club races and different things like that. What if you had to narrow it down to one day of the year where there's a club race or event, or an event that a lot of Donore Harriers people go to? What's the one event or race that gets you most excited?
I still have a tremendous sense of excitement for the All-Ireland Senior Cross Country Championship. The Blue Ribbon, as I always called it. And the one up in Derry last week was of tremendous high quality. Tremendous quality. And I think we're sending really fine teams across to the Algarve next week to compete in the Europeans. And the winners of that are a who's who of Irish athletics. And it's cross-country running, I think, is romantic. It's very special. And just even people like that, Brian Hayes was saying, even though he's out on the track all the time and he's running these great times, he went up on last Sunday to a really miserable, hard course. And he went up there for nothing, only pure prestige. This was a championship that you need your name on. If you want to be, when you look back, if your name is on this, you're one of a small elite group. And if you've been lucky enough to run on a team that has won this championship, that's special, very special.
Pat, where's the best place to get the book?
Well, we're launching it next Thursday night. We're hoping for a big crowd there. But I think you can buy it through the club website, www.donoreharriers.com. There is a setup structure there for buying it. So if you go into the Donore Harriers website, you'll get the instructions to find your way along. So we're hoping people will use that. But our launch is important to us. It's important to us to sell some books, obviously, because we're very much a non-profit organisation, as all athletic clubs are. But it's going to be a really good social occasion. There's been a lot of gentle slagging and ribbing about when is this book coming out. So it's nice to be able to stand up in front of people and hold it up and sort of say, yeah, we have it. So,
brilliant.
Pat, as a historian, it's probably rare we ask you to look forward. What is your hopes for the club over the next 130?
Oh, gosh. Well, we're in a very good position at the moment. We had, we won the under-20s last Sunday up in Derry. We won the under-18s. We were third in the under-16s. And a great friend of mine from another club came up to me and he said, my God, he says, I thought we got rid of you guys. He says, but I was up in Derry there. He said, I saw a string of white shirts with black stripes coming in. And I said, oh my God, these boys haven't gone away. They're here. So I just want the club we're in a tremendous place down there, Chapel is it. We're hoping to get our track resurfaced. There's no point in having a track if you don't have it resurfaced every 5 or 8 years. We've got a tremendous structure down there. Athletics is very vibrant. So just, I think in Donore we have kind of what we've heard in the book as the esprit de coeur. That's been a tremendous club approach. And in Donore, even though we've had these great athletes, some of them, are, ranked in any estimation in Irish athletics. In Donore, it was always the team was always the crucial. The team was always the crucial. And we tell a great story of Eamon Coughlin in in 1978, we were striving hard to regain the Irish cross country. And on the Friday night, Eamon was over in Los Angeles running, in the elite mile, winning a huge mile race in Los Angeles. And he wanted to get back to Dublin to run in the senior cross country and on Sunday. And in fact, he found it very difficult because of weather conditions, fog. And I think he couldn't get into Dublin until about 12 on Sunday. And he made his way down to Ballyfin. And the contrast between Ballyfin, muck and heavy conditions after a wet and Los Angeles on a Friday night. And yet he was determined to win that, and we won it. And, that's the kind of, so that team thing, he was a world-class athlete, leaving all the glory behind him to make it back to be in the starting line in Ballyfin in County Laois for an All-Ireland Senior Cross Country Championship.
Unbelievable.
And by the way, we won.
On that note, Pat, best of luck with your launch night. Best of luck with the book. We will have the link for the book as well in our show notes for this episode. And that is it for this week's episode of the Any Given Monday podcast. Myself, Pat, and Eric. Take care.
Thank you very much, lads.